After over 25 years, the day has finally arrived that Live Alive has been localized and released in the United States officially. But it's not the Super Famicom / Super Nintendo version. It's a remake on the Nintendo Switch built in the Unreal Engine, and as a result, a lot's been changed and overhauled and polished. And today I want to go over those things and see how this remake compares to the original. Is it better? Is it worse? We're gonna find out. I might talk about my impressions on the game as a whole in a week or two, but that depends on how I feel. Let's get started! The first thing you immediately notice upon booting up the game is what a massive leap the presentation has taken. Even though this is still fundamentally a grid-based tactical RPG with 2D sprites, everything around that has been polished to a mirror shine. The overworld actually looks like an overworld now in every chapter. It has brilliant usage of 3D and 2D elements combined to make the world feel much more, if you'll pardon the pun, alive. Whereas the original game was constrained to the limits of the Super Famicom and the budget it was made under, here this remake takes full advantage of the Unreal Engine and makes the overworld sprites and the battle sprites look almost identical. So you no longer have goofy little scenes playing out with dinky little sprites. Everything is at a fairly consistent level of detail and it looks amazing. There's actual cinematography in the cutscenes now. You can look at the overworld and tell what everything is. It doesn't look cheap like the original did. I wouldn't say it looks like a big budget AAA game either, but now everything is visually consistent and it's a massive improvement. Not only that, since all the environments are 3D now, there's an actual sense of physicality and place to them. They're not just generic shapeless blobs and this and that. In the original, it kind of looked like a cheap RPG Maker game, you know? With poorly drawn tiles and assets, but here every chapter has its own visual flourishes and distinct sense of style. It really does feel like 7 games in one to some extent when it comes to the presentation, because they're all the same but different, and now different enough that they really stand out. I think a personal highlight for me is the ninja chapter, which was an ambitious chapter in the original but kind of ugly looking. Here the 3D graphics give the palace you're infiltrating a real sense of place. It feels like an actual castle and you can really feel the progression as you get closer and closer to the top of it. In the original it just kind of felt disjointed, but here there's a really palpable sense of progression, and that's almost entirely because of the visuals. The sprites are better looking, the world's better looking, everything's better looking. I guess if I had to have a complaint here is that it's a little slower than the original game, but that's just because the game wants to show off the graphics, which I can live with because of what I'm about to talk about next. Where do I start? Where do I finish? There are so many little quality of life improvements over the original here that when taken cumulatively, they really breathe new life into this game. For example, every chapter that needed a map, that is to say, every chapter you could get lost in, has a map now that you can bring up whenever you want. Not only that, every chapter has a mini-map that shows you where to go, where you've been, where you want to be, and side objectives. It's great. It makes it much harder to get lost, especially in big chapters like the ninja chapter, where you can often find yourself running around in circles. Now that you have some clear indication of where you're supposed to go, it makes it much easier to progress through the game. On top of that, there's another addition that's my absolute favorite and something this game desperately needed. A button that lets you skip cutscenes. That's right, if you hold ZR on the Switch controller, it'll let you skip most of the cutscenes. Now normally you wouldn't want to do that, but here there are certain moments where you may need to or have to see a cutscene over and over and over, and now that you can skip them, it lets you just bypass that and get back to playing. A big example of this is the crafting parts of the caveman chapter and the near future chapter. Before, you had to go through the same cutscenes over and over and over, but now you can just skip them and keep farming for items. It's a huge improvement in my eyes. Also, another welcome change. You can now see enemies' weaknesses and resistances in battle. This was in the original game, but you had no way of knowing what was what unless you looked up a guide. Now you can see what does the most damage to an enemy and hit them with it. It's not always useful though. Sometimes the stuff they're resistant to will still do more damage to them than something they're weak to, but it's good to have on hand. It's also much easier to farm for items in the chapters that require you to do it. Originally in the Caveman chapter, you had to go through a very convoluted and very tedious timing minigame to get a bunch of items to craft the best stuff for your characters. Here, you just solve math puzzles with cavemen. It's a lot more entertaining, a lot more fun, and it goes by much quicker. In Akira's Near Future chapter, if you're refining items, you can actually skip the cutscene that shows them either being refined or failing to be refined, and you can keep doing this over and over. In fact, if an item fails to be upgraded, the cursor will default you to the item and you can try again, making it so the whole process takes seconds as opposed to minutes. And while I did say the combat is a bit slower, the rest of the game's pacing has been tweaked to compensate. And if I'm not crazy, I think the game is significantly easier now. Your characters are buffed and the enemies are weaker. I'm guessing this is to make this game more accessible to a general audience, because the original could be pretty challenging at times. But the whole time I played through all 7 chapters, I only died about 3 times, and 2 of those were from me being stupid. So on the whole, I'd say it's a much more fun, much more accessible game now, which is good. One thing that's here that the original very badly needed was the ability to pause during a chapter and switch to another chapter. Well, here you can do that. If you're stuck on one chapter, you can just save your progress, stop where you are, and go to another chapter and come back later when you feel like it. In the original game, once you started a chapter, you were stuck in that chapter until you finished. Not here. You can just do it as you please. You can replay chapters to get better items, or you can start them over to do the thing over again. On top of that, instead of there being 4 save slots like in the original, there's 20 save slots now, which is plenty. 21 if you count the autosave. There's lots of other little quality of life changes I could talk about, but if I listed them, we'd be here all day. Suffice to say, they took what was a fairly convoluted, confusing mess of a game and made it so that an average person might actually be able to feasibly beat it. There's even little tooltips and tutorials and stuff in the pause menu and load screens, just in case you're confused. And for those of you who think that ruins your immersion in gaming experience, you can actually turn most of this off. If you want a pure Live Alive experience, you can actually turn most of the accessibility stuff off and play the game closer to the original. So that option's there too. All in all, I'd say if you're gonna play this game, this is how you should play it, because you're much more likely to be able to actually finish the damn thing. I'll start with the easy part here, the music. Up until this point, I've never played a remake where I thought every single piece of music was better than the original game. Well, not anymore. Here, the composer Yoko Shimomura has done the impossible. Every single tune from the original game is superior to its original version. They either have new instruments, new sections, or both. There's even entirely new pieces of music for certain situations, including one I won't spoil. In short, if you like the original music, you'll love it here. I think the fact that there's proper instrumentation now really helps the game, especially in certain moments that felt kind of silly with the somewhat lackluster music of the original. Which brings me to the next bullet point, the voice acting. A lot of people were curious as to whether this was going to be good or bad, and I'm happy to report that on both sides, the voice acting is pretty great. I can't speak for the Japanese version, but I know it's a star-studded cast full of well-known Japanese voice actors. But the English cast is full of, well, people you probably haven't heard of. But that having been said, they really give their all for the most part. The performances in this game, especially on the English side, are really good. They really sell these characters. Not only that, they give a lot of personality to characters that really badly needed it in the original.
Oh, looking for a fight? Ha! Bring it on! I've never lost to a man of Japan! Mahalo!
Fools and children fight with their fists. Come, I'll show you how civilized warriors make their opponents submit.
And when the music and the voice acting work together, you get something that's greater than the sum of its parts. Something that really strikes you emotionally, that you really feel in your soul.
There was a great war some time ago, when I was young. Some time ago, I say, but I remember it like it was yesterday. The terror, the violence. They fought with clanks, machines stronger and swifter than any man. Smarter, even. Driven by AI. Bloodless beasts with hands of chrome that tore my friends apart.
There's one moment in particular where if you've played this entire game before, you know what moment it is, but it's executed so perfectly. I just was floored at the end of it. Like, the voiceovers on both sides are just great. The voice acting can be a little too earnest for its own good sometimes, actually.
You're incredible, little one. Truly incredible. And I'm so proud of you. And so glad that I brought you into this world.
But I much prefer voice acting in a game that tries too hard as opposed to voice acting that doesn't try hard enough. It's nice. Don't take that as a criticism, though. Voice actors trying too hard is much better than them not trying hard enough, even if it does result in some occasionally silly line delivery.
Rejoice! Our savior is come!
And like I said, the voiceovers really add to a lot of these scenes.
Ha! All right, who's next? I've been feeling pretty pumped.
I didn't hate them. And they didn't hate me. I know that much. None of us. Not me, or the captain, or Huey. We're not murderers.
God damn you, why?
My friend, do you recall the man I was that day in distant memory when they sang our hero, Hash, our hero, and I was.
You are.
And as a hero, I'd greet death. My sword, I leave to you, boy. Wield it well. She waits. She hopes that help is coming still. And by love and trust and faith will we be saved. A single soul's enough when against the world we stand. Apart, alone. Believe in me. We plead. We pray. And answer they. I will.
And the opening in the Mecha chapter in both the English and Japanese versions has the vocal stylings of none other than Hironobu fucking Kageyama. The voiceovers took the one thing that was really missing from this game and made it a complete whole. And as a result, all of these things come together to make the Live Alive remake a must-play for 2022, and definitely a hidden gem if it doesn't take off. It's a wonderful game, and if you've been curious about the original or the remake, I highly recommend checking it out. Thanks for watching. Okay, before I go, this is fresh on my mind and I have to mention it. There's this one voice actor named Mark Lee who voices a few characters in this game, and I swear to God, he sounds like Carl from Aqua Teen Hunger Force. So every time he opens his mouth, I just picture...
Who are you? How in blazes did you get past my men? You've been quite the thorn in my side. I see you, boy! Do your worst! For I have an army at my disposal. And they will stop at nothing to destroy you.
I'm not the only one who hears that, right? It's extremely distracting. His performance is otherwise good too. That's the sad part.